September 1999. Matamoros, Tamaulipas. A dusty border road under the burning Mexican sun. Two white SUVs roll slowly to a stop. Inside them, two U.S. federal agents. Unarmed. Outnumbered. And in front of them, the man who would go down in history as one of the most feared cartel bosses of all time, Osiel Cárdenas Guillén. The agents step out, nerves tight. Across from them, dozens of heavily armed men in tactical gear. M16s, AK-47s. Rocket launchers. A wall of weapons pointed directly at their chests. The man in charge leans casually against his truck, staring coldly. Osiel. Stocky, mustached, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. His eyes give nothing away, only danger. Osiel wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to even exist at this level. A low-level thug turned kingpin, now holding American lives in his hands. In Mexico, he was already a legend. They called him El Mata Amigos, the friend killer. Ruthless. Unpredictable. A man who rose to power by betraying even those closest to him. The agents pleaded. They were only here to gather intelligence. They meant no harm. But Osiel didn't believe in mercy. He believed in power. And that day, he decided to make a statement, not just to the DEA, not just to Mexico, but to the United States government itself. Imagine it, the silence broken only by the hum of engines and the buzzing cicadas. Two Americans staring down dozens of rifles, waiting for the order that could end their lives. One command from Osiel, and history would have been written in blood. But at the very last second, Osiel didn't give that order. He let them go. Not out of kindness. Not out of fear. But because he wanted to send a message: I own this border. I decide who lives and who dies. Even your agents, walk under my mercy. That single standoff would echo all the way to Washington. It would unleash an international manhunt. And it would mark the beginning of the end for Osiel Cárdenas Guillén. But the question is, how did a poor kid from Matamoros become the man who dared to challenge the United States itself? To understand that, we need to go back. Back to the beginning. To the story of a man who rose from the streets to become the untouchable boss of the Gulf Cartel, and the bloody trail he left behind. This is the story of Osiel Cárdenas Guillén. The cartel boss who turned friends into corpses. Who built an army out of soldiers. And who dared to challenge the United States itself. From the streets of Matamoros, to the throne of the Gulf Cartel. He rose on betrayal. He ruled with terror. And he unleashed a war that would scar a nation. This is not just the story of a man, it is the story of a kingdom built on fear, power, and blood. This is the story of Osiel Cárdenas Guillén. The cartel boss who challenged the United States. You are watching True Crime Cartel Originals. Before we dive into today's story, I've got one small favor to ask. If you love deep, real stories like this, tap the like button, hit subscribe, and drop a comment below telling us which city you're watching from. It helps more than you know, and it allows us to keep bringing you stories no one else dares to tell. Now, let's get into the story. Matamoros, Mexico. A city where the border is a river, but crossing it can cost your life. In the shadows of this land, one man sharpened his hunger. His name, Osiel Cárdenas Guillén. The man who would one day stare down U.S. federal agents and live to tell about it. But before he became a cartel boss, Osiel was just another forgotten boy. A child of poverty, born in 1967 in the dusty streets of Matamoros. His family had little, food was scarce, hope even scarcer. By 14, he was forced to leave home and live with his sister. Childhood was over before it began. To survive, he worked wherever he could, in noisy factories, as a waiter in cheap cantinas, and finally in a mechanic's garage, where oil and grease stained his hands. But ordinary work meant ordinary life. And in Matamoros, ordinary meant invisible. Osiel wanted more. He wanted power. By 19, he was already married and running his mechanic shop as a front. Beneath the hood of broken cars, cocaine was quietly sold. Police knew his name. Arrest after arrest followed, assault, threats, even homicide. But nothing ever stuck. He always returned to the streets. In 1992, his ambition crossed the border. Brownsville, Texas. Osiel was caught with 2 kilos of cocaine and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Prison did not break him. It forged him. When he walked free in 1994, his eyes no longer searched for survival, they searched for dominance. In January 1996, the Gulf Cartel's powerful leader, Juan Garcia Abrego, was arrested and extradited to the U.S. His empire shattered. Power was up for grabs. Among the ambitious was Osiel. Still a minor figure, he latched onto Salvador El Chava Gomez Herrera, a rising cartel figure, and a trusted friend. But in the cartel world, trust is a weakness. Osiel betrayed El Chava, shooting him dead to seize power for himself. From that night on, his name carried terror. He was no longer Osiel the mechanic. He was El Mata Amigos, the friend killer. Killing his friend was not just ambition, it was a declaration. If he could betray El Chava, no one was safe. Fear became his weapon. But Osiel knew fear alone wasn't enough. To protect his throne, he needed something more, a private army. And soon, he would find it in Mexico's most dangerous men, soldiers who would become Los Zetas. From mechanic, to warlord. And next, he would dare to challenge not just rivals, but the United States itself. 1996. With El Chava gone, Osiel Cárdenas stepped into the void. Once a small-time hustler, now a feared leader. His betrayal had earned him both power and enemies. He understood one truth: survival meant control. And control required money, more drugs, more routes, more corruption. Every street in Matamoros soon carried his shadow. Osiel built alliances with corrupt police, offering bribes too large to refuse and threats too deadly to ignore. With their uniforms as a shield, his influence spread unchecked. But Osiel was not satisfied with protection. He wanted firepower. And for that, he turned to a new idea: recruiting elite soldiers from Mexico's own special forces. These deserters, trained in jungle warfare, ambush tactics, and counterintelligence, became his personal army. They would be known as Los Zetas. Los Zetas brought terror unlike anything Mexico had seen. Kidnappings, torture, executions, they enforced Osiel's will with military precision. The friend killer now had an army. Word spread quickly. In border towns, people whispered his name with fear. The man who killed friends was now untouchable, protected by killers who once served the state. His empire grew. Smuggling routes stretched through Tamaulipas into Texas. Cocaine shipments multiplied. And every dollar made his grip stronger. But Osiel ruled not just with wealth, but with paranoia. He trusted no one, kept allies at gunpoint, and demanded loyalty sealed in blood. To his men, he offered power and riches. To his rivals, he promised death. And to the Mexican people, he delivered fear that seeped into daily life. The Gulf Cartel's presence in Tamaulipas became absolute. Businesses paid protection money, politicians bowed, and even journalists knew silence was survival. Osiel reveled in his growing empire. But ambition breeds enemies. Rival cartels watched closely, while the DA began to map his every move. To Osiel, fear was not enough. He wanted to send a message that no man, no cartel, not even a government could stand against him. And soon, he would make his boldest move yet, to confront the United States directly. Not in secret, not in shadows, but in open defiance. Osiel Cárdenas had risen from mechanic to warlord, from hustler to cartel boss. But his hunger for power would soon drive him into a direct clash with the United States. What happened next, on a lonely road in Matamoros, would ignite international outrage, and mark the beginning of his downfall. By the late 1990s, Osiel Cárdenas was no longer a rising figure, he was the power in Tamaulipas. But power, he believed, was proven not in shadows, but in confrontation. Osiel's paranoia grew as DEA and FBI agents circled closer. Informants whispered that Americans were mapping his every move. To Osiel, this was not just surveillance, it was disrespect. November 9, 1999. A routine day for 2 U.S. federal agents in Matamoros. Driving in an unmarked vehicle, they tracked cartel activity. But this time, they were not the hunters. They were the prey. Osiel's convoy surrounded the Americans. Black trucks boxed them in, engines roaring, gunmen in ski masks leaning out with rifles raised. The road turned into a trap. He stepped out. Osiel himself. Armed, furious, daring the agents to move. He wanted them to feel the fear he instilled in every rival. And in that moment, the friend killer lived up to his name. The agents knew they were seconds from death. Surrounded by more than a dozen armed men, they faced a choice: surrender, or gamble on survival. Osiel demanded answers. Who were they? Why were they in a city? Every word he spoke was laced with fury. His men, twitching on triggers, waited for his order. One wrong move, and 2 U.S. agents would vanish into cartel legend. Washington would never forgive it. And Osiel knew it. Instead of pulling the trigger, Osiel played a different game. He let them go. Not out of mercy, but as a message: I control this land. Even the United States cannot touch me. The Americans lived, but the story spread like wildfire. A cartel boss had openly threatened U.S. federal agents at gunpoint, and walked away. In Washington, outrage exploded. In Mexico, fear deepened. And Osiel? He basked in his own myth, believing he had proven untouchable. But arrogance comes with a cost. By daring to humiliate the U.S., Osiel placed a target on his back bigger than ever before. Both governments wanted him caged, or dead. Los Zetas doubled their violence, believing fear could shield their boss. But every killing, every kidnapping, only gave more fuel to his enemies. The Matamoros standoff was a turning point. It made Osiel infamous. But it also sealed his fate. From that night forward, the U.S. and Mexico were united in one mission: to bring him down. Osiel Cárdenas thought the Matamoros standoff made him untouchable. In truth, it marked the beginning of his downfall. Because when you challenge the most powerful nation on earth, they will come for you. After the Matamoros standoff, Osiel was no longer just Mexico's problem. He had made himself America's most wanted south of the border. The Gulf Cartel moved like an army under his command. Yet the more he tightened his grip, the more enemies he created, within Mexico, within his own circle, and across the border. By 2001, Osiel lived like a king but hid like a fugitive. Safe houses replaced mansions, whispers replaced trust. His paranoia grew with every sunrise. Mexican authorities, once in his pocket, began to bend under U.S. pressure. The hunt for Osiel had turned relentless. Osiel believed his Zetas could shield him forever. But even the most loyal assassins cannot fight the weight of 2 governments closing in. March 2003. Reynosa, Tamaulipas. Osiel was traveling in a convoy when authorities struck. The ambush came fast, decisive, and impossible to escape. In the chaos, gunfire rattled. But this time, the friend killer had no friends to save him. He was dragged from his vehicle, furious, handcuffed, defeated. The untouchable boss who once stared down the United States, was now paraded before cameras as proof of Mexico's biggest victory. But prison in Mexico was no end. Osiel continued to command from behind bars, his orders smuggled out in whispers and coded notes. The United States refused to let him remain a king in chains. In 2007, under heavy guard, Osiel Cárdenas was extradited across the border. In an American courtroom, stripped of his empire, Osiel faced the cold judgment of law. No gold chains. No Zetas. No escape. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, his fortune shattered, his power dissolved into memory. The man who ruled Tamaulipas now ruled only Osiel. But even in defeat, his shadow lingers. The Zetas he once empowered became monsters of their own, unleashing bloodshed that outlived their master. Osiel Cárdenas believed himself untouchable. Yet history proved otherwise. For every cartel boss, no matter how feared, there is always a downfall. And so ends the story of the friend killer. The cartel boss who dared to challenge the United States, who ruled with fear, and who fell into the very darkness he created. But in the world of cartels, one man's downfall is never the end. It is only the beginning of another. Osiel Cárdenas may be locked away, but his shadow still lingers over Mexico. The Gulf Cartel did not vanish with his capture. It splintered. Without their friend killer, the Gulf Cartel fractured into rival factions. Each lieutenant wanted the throne. Each betrayal spilled more blood. The Zetas, once Osiel's private army, broke free. They evolved into one of the most violent cartels in history, spreading terror far beyond Tamaulipas. Massacres, kidnappings, extortion, the tools Osiel once unleashed became weapons no one could control. The legacy of his choices drowned Mexico in blood. In United States prisons, Osiel became a ghost story. In Mexico, his name still carries weight. Young traffickers whisper about him like a legend. Some see him as a ruthless traitor who betrayed his own. Others, as a genius who built an empire from nothing. Both are true. Even today, Tamaulipas bleeds from the wounds left by his reign. Streets patrolled by armed convoys, families torn apart by disappearances. Yet the myth of Osiel Cárdenas refuses to die. Narco ballads sing his name. Corridos turn his crimes into folklore. The truth is darker. He was no hero. He was no savior. He was a man consumed by power, blinded by violence, and devoured by paranoia. And for all his power, Osiel's empire ended the same way most cartel stories do, with betrayal, capture, and silence. But his blueprint remains. Cartels learned from him. Militarized armies. Ruthless betrayals. Fear as a weapon. Every boss who rises now walks the same road Osiel paved. The same greed. The same violence. And the same inevitable fall. In the end, Osiel's story is not just about one man. It is about a cycle, a wheel of blood that turns endlessly, crushing anyone who believes they can outrun it. Behind the legend, behind the myth, behind the fear, lies a truth too often forgotten: no cartel boss ever truly wins. And so, the legacy of Osiel Cárdenas remains a warning. A man who rose from nothing, seized everything, and lost it all. His story is a mirror reflecting the fate of every cartel empire, built in shadows, and destined to fall in them. This was the story of Osiel Cárdenas, the cartel boss who challenged the United States, and lost. And with that, we close the chapter on Osiel Cárdenas, a man whose hunger for power reshaped the Gulf Cartel, fractured Mexico, and left scars that still bleed today. His empire has crumbled, but his shadow lingers, reminding us that every rise comes with an inevitable fall. If you believe stories like this need to be told, stories buried in the dark, stories too dangerous to be forgotten, then stay with us. There are more secrets, more betrayals, and more truths waiting to be uncovered. Subscribe, share this story, and keep your eyes open. Because in the world of cartels, history has a way of repeating itself. And the next tale might be darker than the last.